Are we live? All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to tune in today for this critically important conversation about the dangerous increase in hate crimes, violence, and discrimination since the start of this pandemic against our Asian American and Pacific Islander community. You know, according to a recent report from Stop AAPI Hate, there were nearly 3,800 self-reported incidents of anti-Asian violence and discrimination between March 19th of last year and February 28th of this year. That number alone is staggering and deeply disturbing. In Massachusetts alone, nearly 100 incidents were reported in that same time frame. But it gets even worse when you take a look under the hood and see that Asian American women reported more than twice as many incidents of hate than men. Children make up more than 1 in every 10 incidents, and that these reports aren't unique to any one state. In fact, they received reports from every single state in the District of Columbia. This alarming increase didn't happen randomly. It's a direct consequence of a long history of anti-Asian racism and misogyny that has proliferated across our nation dating back centuries. And while it may seem to many that this behavior has gone largely undetected, that couldn't be further from the truth for AAPI families who are confronted with hate sometimes daily. That bias was fueled last year by some of our political leaders, including the former president of our country, who in their attempt to point blame for the spread of COVID squarely on China ended up painting a target on the backs of our Asian American neighbors. Now, I won't repeat the xenophobic slurs used to describe the virus, but it's obvious that the promotion of this kind of rhetoric has contributed directly to the violence and hate-induced fear now being felt by AAPI families here in Massachusetts and in communities across America following last week's horrific shooting of 6 Asian American women in Georgia, the murder of an 84-year-old Asian American man out for a morning walk in San Francisco, a subway attack of a 61-year-old Asian American man in New York City, and a number of physical assaults on elderly AAPI individuals in Oakland's Chinatown. This isn't a new problem, far from it, but we have the power and the control to take action against hate. And that's what today's conversation is all about: listening, understanding, and then instigating the change that we need. That's why I'm so thrilled to be joined by 3 incredible women who have been working to stop AAPI hate for years. And I'm so grateful that they're able to break from their busy schedules to join all of us today. Now, our first guest is my colleague, fellow mom, and dear friend in the House of Representatives, Congresswoman Grace Meng. She represents New York's 6th Congressional District, and she sits on the powerful Appropriations Committee, responsible for funding every federal agency, program, and project in the United States government. She also serves as the first vice chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. Congresswoman Meng knows what it means to break barriers as the first and only Asian American member of Congress from New York State and the first female Congress member from Queens since former vice presidential nominee Geraldine Ferraro. She has led the passage of legislation to strike the term Oriental from federal law, and is also the sponsor of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which would expedite the federal government's response to the rise of hate crimes exacerbated during the pandemic. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this important legislation, and I'm so thankful you could take part in this discussion. Welcome, Congresswoman Meng. Hey, all right. I'll introduce all of you and then we'll start. I didn't know if you wanted to say a few words, but I'll keep going because our whole panel is so powerful and we're so lucky to have. Our second guest is State Representative Tram Nguyen, who proudly works hard each day for the 18th Essex District, which includes parts of Andover, Boxford, North Andover, and Tewksbury. She is a first-generation Vietnamese American immigrant and was the first person in her family to attend college and law school. From the start of her legal career until she took office, Representative Nguyen worked at Greater Boston Legal Services as a legal aid attorney and advocated for domestic violence survivors, workers, seniors, veterans, and children. When she was elected in 2018, the same year as me, she became the first Vietnamese American woman in elected office in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. She became the first Vietnamese American elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives and the first Asian American on the board of directors of the Massachusetts Caucus of Women Legislators. Last week, Representative Nguyen announced the introduction of legislation to address a rise in hate crimes in Massachusetts in recent years. So I'm so grateful to her for taking a few minutes to join us today, and we can't wait to hear about your legislation, Tram.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, last but not least, definitely not least, our third awesome woman. I've known Representative Howard for a long time, and her story, much like our other two panelists, is just an inspiration. Representative Howard has been a public servant for nearly 3 decades before becoming a state representative for the 17th Middlesex District last year. With that victory, Representative Howard became the first Cambodian American woman to be elected as a state legislator in the United States. She is a survivor of the genocide in Cambodia, where both of her maternal grandparents, her father, and 3 younger siblings died at the hands of the Khmer Rouge regime between 1975 and 1979. She resettled in the United States at age 11 after spending more than 2 years in a Thai refugee camp. As a child refugee who spoke no English, Representative Howard overcame tremendous adversity, confronted with racism, physical abuse, and homelessness. She not only met challenges that seemed insurmountable, she beat them, going on to earn a college degree, building a family, and working tirelessly for the greater Lowell community. For almost 12 years, she worked in the office of Congresswoman Nikki Tsongas, which is where I met her first, connecting constituents to immigration, housing, and small business services. And most recently, she served as the Chief of External and Government Relations with the Lowell Community Health Center. Representative Howard, we are thrilled to have you with us today. Okay, so let's get right into it. I'd like to start this discussion by hearing from each of you about your own personal experiences. You know, each of you has been an incredible advocate for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders who are every bit American as everyone else in our country. Thank you, Congresswoman Meng, for sporting the sweatshirt. And I can't imagine how difficult it's been over the past year to deal with the alarming and dangerous increase in hate directed at AAPI individuals. I know that each of you have been doing such incredible work to elevate this issue, which is deeply personal to each of you. So please describe to those tuning in what you and your loved ones have experienced and what you're hearing from your community about AAPI hate. Congresswoman Meng, would you mind kicking us off?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Lori, for giving our community this space today for us to come together. It is so important right now. Not everyone's doing it, but you really demonstrate your compassion and leadership by bringing us together. And thank you to Representatives Nguyen and Howard for your leadership. I look forward to meeting you in person one day. You know, these incidents are not really new to our community. They, of course, have gone up exponentially in the last year, but they really are incidents that we have had to kind of deal with our whole life. You know, I remember many incidents where people are making fun of your slanty eyes or your food. Like I brought noodles to school once and people said I was eating worms. They accuse us of eating dogs and, you know, the consistent yelling for us to go back to your country, even though I was born right here. So it's just been a very slow and steady, you know, type of influx of comments our whole lives. And honestly, for me at least, most of them, I never really felt like I was in any physical harm. And so most of the time I just kept quiet and I didn't say anything. And, you know, part of me keeps thinking back to all these incidents that I grew up with, because now I wish I did say something. You know, they seem so small and people always would respond like I was just joking, you know, and make you feel like I was taking it more seriously than they meant it to be. And I just wish I had spoken up more. And I think that's something that our community is realizing now, that we have to speak up and to tell our stories to prevent it from happening to other people and to prevent worse incidents from happening.
We all have a role in speaking up, for sure. How about you, Representative Nguyen?
Thank you so much for creating the space for reflection, not only on the mass murder, but for us to take a stance against anti-Asian hate and violence as a whole. What the Congresswoman just mentioned really resonates with me, because I came here to the United States when I was 5 years old and had to learn English and really had to take racism and all of the stereotypes head on. And I thought that, you know, it seemed like distant memory until 2016, when I stepped out of the courtroom, where I've been practicing and have stepped out of the courtroom many times representing my clients. And I had this person who drove with his bike by me and said, "Get out of my country, you don't belong here." So I want to make that point to say that this is not anything that's like a distant memory for us. This is happening right now. And of course, we need to continue to fight for economic justice, social justice, and just transportation and housing, so many issues in our community to make sure that our community have resources. But as we can see, resources don't shield us from this violence. When a hate crime happens, it's not just against an individual. It's basically the perpetrator is terrorizing a whole community. And so I want to take this opportunity to just remind, especially folks in the Asian American community, that it has been a very heavy week. I'm angry and heartbroken, and we all need to take a moment to really take care of our mental health during this difficult time. And for our allies, reach out to your Asian American friends. We're not okay. None of this is okay, and it has no place in the Commonwealth or anywhere in our country.
Vanna, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Congresswoman Trahan, for giving us the space. I also share what Congresswoman Meng and Rep. Trahan said. I've been told to go back to my country. I've been, said, yell at, that I eat dogs. But at the time, I was in high school, so English was a barrier, still learning English. Why would someone be yelling at me to go back to my country if they only knew, if they would only knew what I had just left?
Yeah.
How many people have I just lost? And so at the time, no one taught us newly arrived refugees. That was racism. That was hate words. As I get older, then I learned that was that was inappropriate. And so, as of last year, when I decided to run, at first I was still considering, should I run for the race? The community, who have known me for almost 30 years, pushed me to run because they have known me. They know me. I have been literally on the ground with them. So they know that I could represent them, to be their voice, and to be the first Asian woman. However, I took almost 3 months to come to my decision to run. And one of the reasons that I hesitated was because it was during the time, the lie, the rhetoric that came out of Washington, D.C., Rob Nguyen and I actually, and many of our colleagues, stood at the State House, on the steps of the State House, early March, letting people know the rhetoric, the lie, it's very dangerous, needs to stop. Something like happened in Atlanta is going to happen, and it did happen. So we were not surprised that what happened in Atlanta happened. We were warning people that the rhetoric someone will be hurt, someone will be killed. And so it took me almost 3 months. And then I realized that the district needed a voice. It needed a change. And so I decided to go forward and put myself out there, because the district was so much bigger than me. And and just as this last November on General Election Day, I was standing holding sign. I had every right to be there with many of my fellow Cambodian American friends. Across the street, a white man holding the Trump sign, screaming and yelling racial slurs at us, telling us to go back to our country. So this happened in November of last year. To me, to my friends. We had every right to be there. And so, we, just like Rep. Nguyen said, we need to be an ally. We need to talk to our neighbors, our communities, our friends, our families. We need to talk about this. That we can no longer idly standing by. We no longer can be silenced. We need to speak up. In my culture, my Cambodian culture, the women, we are culturally conditioned not to speak up, not to say a word. But I am getting better because it's for the overall community. And so I am getting better at speaking up.
Oh, you've gotten better is like an understatement. I mean, the courage, of all three of you. I mean, I know how hard running for office is, and putting yourself through that rigor. But I don't know what it's like as an Asian American woman and to break barriers like that. So one, thank you for the courage to do that for all of us, and definitely for the AAPI community. I think a lot of people simply don't know or sadly don't want to know. So you're sharing, you sharing your stories right now is just, it's so important, even for those who have already heard your unbelievable stories and what you've already overcome. I think it's important that people understand the importance of not only opposing AAPI hate, because look, by no means it's not a tall order, right? I mean, we all oppose hate speech, but going beyond that, and we've heard a lot, especially this past year, about being anti-racist, which is really life or death in its most extreme forms, as we saw last week, right? I mean, we saw how the presence of hate speech can be deadly for people in our community. But what do you say to people who say, I'm against hate crimes and discrimination targeting Asian American and Pacific Islanders, but what else can I do? And I think that would be interesting to hear from you all in terms of it's not enough to just obviously be against it. You actually can do so much to be anti-racist, which, so many folks have really leaned into that conversation, especially this last year. So Congresswoman Meng, we'll keep the same order because that's easy.
Thank you, Lori, for the question. It's such an important question within the Asian community and also beyond, because there are a lot of Asian Americans who have not necessarily ever felt comfortable speaking out. And I love Rep. Howard's phrase of culturally conditioned. I think I've been searching for that phrase all week without knowing it. We're literally taught not to rock the boat. And so to be able to give people the tools to help speak out, and how appropriate that we're actually gathering here today. There's a community-led effort today. There's a national virtual day of action. People are posting the hashtag Stop Asian Hate. And there's a website, AsianAmericanDayOfAction.com. And the last I heard, it's actually not functioning because of the overwhelming amount of traffic, but that's actually a good thing. And that has a whole list of ideas and organizations and things that people can do to help, from very symbolic and easy actions to long-term engagements with organizations and leaders. So there's a whole host of options, but really also to have conversations like this. It's so important, and I really want to say to Congresswoman Trahan that I really appreciate this. I have probably heard the most concerns from people about not having a space. You and I gathered here today. We are fortunate to have this space, to have like-minded people people. But there are so many people, even in our own networks, that have told me that they have no one to talk to. I've been speaking to young people a lot who are not comfortable talking about this with their own parents and their families. So to provide this space where we can talk it out and check in on each other, and to find ways finally to have these difficult conversations. Sometimes it's within our own families, within our own communities. We have to address racism that's aimed at our community, of course, but even sometimes racism that might exist within our communities as well.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. How about you, Representative Nguyen?
Absolutely. I'm really glad that we have a National Day of Speaking Out and of Action, but it definitely should be every day. And I completely agree with Congresswoman Meng that these are difficult discussions that need to continue. And one of the things I have seen is I've been hardened by some of the news coverage. I never thought that we would be able to have these conversations or read about the different aspects of racism against Asians and Asian Americans in this country. And it was so unfortunate that it takes such a mass murder for this to happen. And I don't want us to lose that momentum. So for me, it's an emphasis on making sure that we continue this narrative, that we should not let the other narratives dominate the conversation. Let's be clear. This is not a man with a bad day or who is dealing with a bad day. This is a mass murder of 8 people, 6 of whom are Asian women. So that's number one. We need to continue to elevate those messages and elevate AAPI voices, Asian American Pacific Islanders, but also hold elected officials and community leaders accountable for their words and actions. As we have said since the beginning, words matter. Putting a target on a whole community, that is something that should not be taken lightly. And we have seen the consequences of trying to sweep these things under the rug. And that is not acceptable in any shape or form. But also, we need to hold all Americans accountable for these hate-motivated crimes, which is why I filed my hate crimes bill. Because like I said, this is not a crime against an individual. It's terrorizing a whole community. And if we take that lightly, what are we messaging to our community? That they don't matter? And so I'm not saying that the hate crimes bill is the end all be all, because it's not going to solve racism. So my other suggestion is for us to educate ourselves, continue to learn, and to also make sure that students, K-12 particularly, have a comprehensive understanding of history. That's why I also filed another bill to promote racially and socially inclusive education at the K-12 level, because we need to talk about these things to understand humanity and appreciate humanity at a different level. And so, of course, the third one is please continue to stand in solidarity. We are not alone. We need to continue to work with other communities to address this violence and hate. It is not an Asian American problem. It is an American problem.
Oh, well said. And I wish I could co-sponsor your legislation because whether it was after George Floyd, after Atlanta, I mean, you really do get to the heart of this by addressing how we educate our young people, how we make them aware of even how we teach history in our country to make sure that we're getting the whole story and that we don't fall into traps. We don't let history repeat itself. We don't relearn lessons, right? I mean, this is what it's all about. And education really does matter, and how we teach it and who teaches it really matters. Okay, Representative Howard.
Thank you. And I actually was happy to add my name to Rep. Nguyen's bill. And so I was one of the earliest sponsors. So I mean, we all know that racism, hate, discrimination, sexism are all taught, not learned. None of us were born to hate, right? And so it's what they see, it's what they were taught, and that's why we need to speak out, speak up, and expose the people that peddle it, the lie. And it's time that we all come together and speak out and speak up of everyone's contributions to this country. The Asian American I mean, in the city of Lowell alone, we have a town, we have a section in the city of Lowell that has been designated as the Cambodia town. We contribute so much. We want to just raise a family. We just want to be able, when we get older, to have our grandchildren, to have a little bit of savings so we can enjoy our life, when we are retiring, just like everyone else. We are here to stay, and we are here to to just contribute to society, and have to have to be treated like the way you want to be treated. And so it's we have to have a dialogue with our friends, our neighbors, our community, our co-workers, and educate folks. And just like Rep. Nguyen said, that we need to address the curriculum. We need to bring back the curriculum into pre-K all the way to 12. Teach even the ugly truth, the truth and the ugly stories of the United States. So we going back to centuries. So we need to bring back curriculum in our public school systems, and teach the good side and the ugly side of America.
Yeah, no, our history is messy and it's ugly, but we're not being truthful with ourselves and with our future generations, with our children, if we're not able to confront it. And that's probably one of the best things that we can do to ensure that, our future generations are equipped with the tools and the knowledge and the truth. I was lucky to get all three of you, even for this amount of time. And, these conversations always wrap up way before we want them to. But Grace, I know that you have committee hearings today, even on a Friday afternoon. You're still going. But before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you one more time. You all are incredible women who not only courageously made the decision to run for office and to win, but in doing so, you're dedicating your lives to building better lives for the people that you represent. So I want to thank you for that. And I also want to give you an opportunity, and Grace, if you have to jump, just jump. But I also want to give you all a chance, if you have parting words, to share them.
I'll go first.
Sorry, go ahead, Congresswoman Meng. You need to go.
I will have to jump afterwards for the hearing, but I do want to say, Lori, you have an opportunity to sponsor a bill like that, because we are about to introduce a similar bill, and Rep. Nguyen, I'm going to take a look at your bill as well, and we can do our part to make sure that our kids are getting a more complete teaching of American history. But really just wanted to say thank you once again. Thank you for supporting legislation in Congress to help curb this rise in hate crimes, and for being such a tremendous ally of the AAPI community. I know we are in public today talking about this issue, but Lori is just as much of an ally behind the scenes and in Congress as well. And so thank you, everyone, for all that you do.
Thank you, Grace. You take care of yourself. Tell the boys I said hi. How about you, Representative Nguyen?
I'll let Representative Howard go, because I know that she was itching to go. I know she has a lot to say, and I'm interested in hearing that.
I wanted to also add to my previous remark earlier that, when I heard all those hateful words coming at me and a lot of my refugee friends when we were going to school, for many years, because they were making fun of my accent, and a lot of us accent. So I started to really, changing, trying really hard to really pronounce each word. So for the longest time, like, oh gosh, I have a terrible, but now I embrace it. That makes me unique. So I want to tell to all the boys and girls out there who are not born here, who have accent, embrace it. And so that makes you unique, who you are, and you unique.
Oh, perfect words. Perfect. Thank you.
Well,
Representative.
I have so much love for my colleague here, Representative Howard. She's been just an amazing contribution to the legislature, and I love everything that you have to say, Rep. Howard. And that is exactly the message that we need to continue to send out to folks of acceptance and tolerance. And not just that, but celebration. That is just so key here. Our community, we just need to emphasize that this murder did not come out of nowhere. There are thousands of violent cases towards AAPI community members every single day, and our voice will not continue to be silent any longer. And we need to continue to create space. We need to continue to amplify Asian voices and reflect and call out and condemn and just educate ourselves every single day of what we can do to build a kinder, more inclusive and welcoming community for all. And I'm just so thrilled that you have created this space, Congresswoman Trahan. This is just such a wonderful event to be able to reflect and really show our emotions. I feel like, we have to put on this front as elected officials and leaders, and we haven't given ourselves the time and space for self-care and really to take in the grief that we've all felt. And so I really appreciate this.
Oh, well, it's so important. And, I learned last year how important self-care was, when during the Black Lives Matter protests, and I saw our activists and our Black American community out there, day after day, just fighting for the rights to be respected and be treated. And, it hadn't really occurred to me to think about that in terms of when are you taking care of yourself? When are you sort of setting aside time for yourself? Because you see such power and strength when folks are speaking that you just assume like they're restoring it, and we should never assume that. And so, one, I hope you all are taking care of yourself. I hope you're giving yourselves time to reflect and to restore your energy and to recognize how awesome you are. This conversation was tremendous, of course, but these conversations, I think, are an opportunity for you all to go ahead and have your own, right? With your family, with your friends, and with your neighbors. I can't say thank you enough to Representatives Nguyen and Howard, and of course, Congresswoman Meng for their extraordinary leadership. Certainly for me, your partnership and your friendship, it means so much to have you at the table, creating space for more AAPI women tomorrow. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in, for being a part of this conversation. It's so important for each of us to realize the powerful role we all must play if we're going to end hate in all its forms and create a more inclusive country and community for ourselves, for our families and neighbors. So there's no question we have a lot of work to do to get there, but it's not impossible if we all work on it together. So thank you again. Stay safe and get vaccinated. First chance you get. All right. You take care, ladies. I'll see you soon.
Be well, everyone.